It is 7 o'clock. Does anybody know if Sarah Fox is joining us? I know there's an orchestra concert tonight, so that's where Megan is.
I have not heard from her.
Yeah, we'll get going because I have a feeling she's probably not. So welcome, everyone. This is our third and final public forum for question 2. It's an informational forum. We are live on YouTube with our Zoom. For people in the audience, if you have questions, if you could come up and sit close because the speaker right in front of us is what's going to pick up the sound. All right, so I am going to share my screen. And for those of you who have joined us before, we will go through the screens again. For those of you who haven't, welcome. So oftentimes the question that we hear is why do we need the funding now? And to put it short and sweet, that these are immediate ongoing needs and they have been deferred in our schools for quite a while. And so that we have had to work to maximize every dollar in our budget. These are needs that are not going to go away, and not meeting them directly impacts our students, teachers, and staff, risking falling behind in meeting all of the educational needs of the kids in our district. If we defer these needs, they just become more expensive. So one of the estimates that we had our business director do was to use a standard rate to see if we waited until next year to have these asks, or if question 2 is not successful and they get put into next year's budget, they will be about a little bit over $192,000 more expensive than what we are requesting now for the exact same things. In addition, we will have further maintenance needs next year that aren't addressed this year on top of the ones that we would like to be addressing here.
So part of what led our budget development process was the launch of a strategic plan initiative that started around spring of 2021. And we engaged over 26 stakeholders, students, parents, school committee members. That was Megan Taylor and Sarah Fox, who worked on helping us to develop these strategic plan. There are 5 pillars of the plan: teaching and learning, professional culture, diversity, equity, and inclusion, technology, and facilities and operations. When we developed the budget with principals and directors, we asked that they align any budget request with our strategic plan.
So here is an overview of the various sort of buckets that we've defined where the asks come in and how much is being one-time costs versus recurring costs. And that at the bottom, you'll see it gets us to that number that's a little bit over $3 million. First off, we have safety. And these are things like security camera replacements and new installations in schools that do not have them already. There's a whole revamp for the high school, the main doors at the high school that I actually in the SAC learned about a little bit late last week, where it's going to include, those doors are apparently at the end of their useful life anyways and need to be adjusted, but it will also enhance security. There will be card swipe systems. There will be ID systems for visitors coming into the building so that we know who is in our building at all times and whether they should be in our buildings. And then for students with the card swipes, it will help not as students come in the morning, but for anybody who is late or has to leave early, it will help streamline those systems so that we know, again, if there's an emergency at the school, who should be in the school and shouldn't be in the school. So there are replacement radios as well, and those are the replacement radios have been things that have been being talked about for quite some time. Technology, and many of our technology asks are in question one, but there are a few additional asks here in this ask as well, and there are additional requests for software and technology equipment at the village school. Personnel is one of our larger asks within this, and these are not requests for additional classroom teachers. So that's been a big question that we've received over and over, that we do have declining enrollment, and so why do we have so much personnel? And these are not requests for classroom teachers. These are requests for, you'll see things like permanent subs, which will help stabilize our substitute problem that we've had for even predating the pandemic, but particularly within COVID and trying to staff classrooms when teachers are sick. It has been it's been very difficult over the past 2 years, and we have some permanent subs in some buildings, and it's been a very effective way to work within this. And so adding additional permanent subs was deemed by the principals to be very valuable. We are asking for, later on, we're asking for STEAM carts and curriculum. And so there are STEAM teachers in here as well. You'll see some tutors. There's an assistant principal at the elementary school that will be shared between the two elementary schools. A college and career assistant at the high school that's going to help really streamline a lot of the work that guidance does and be able to work directly with students as they're preparing to go towards college or their career path. Additionally, there is Groundskeepers and Maintenance, which again, we'll talk about quite a bit as we go through things. I'm sure some questions will come up. A big criticism of the school department in recent years has been that we do not maintain our grounds effectively and that our maintenance is behind. And so this person is really a dedicated person that will be able to help facilitate all of that. One of the positions that has created a lot of questions is that of the DEI director. And I will let Dr. Bucky fill you in on what that person would be tasked with.
Sure, there have been a number of questions about adding a DEI director. This is actually a position that exists currently in many districts. Beverly has a DEI director, Essex Tech has a DEI director, Reading. And for districts like Marblehead that do not have such a position, they're adding this role. And so we looked, I reached out to the state listserv to ask what districts had this, how they implemented it, the salary range for this position. And it really is a student-facing position, because just as we have math specialists that support classroom teachers, it's not to suggest that they can't teach math, but the added support is necessary. Same thing with a technology integration specialist or a literacy coach. The DEI director would help when we see issues across the district, which if you've been paying attention to the superintendent's updates or principal updates from Village or the high school or vets this year, we've had a number of incidents of homophobia, of racism, classism, transphobia, so anti-Semitism. And so this will really provide a support for classroom teachers in working with students when issues of lack of inclusive practices or when things come up that relate to diversity. They'll lead in curriculum evaluation. Some of the ask in this budget are for new supplies, materials, resources, classroom libraries, for instance, at Village and Vets, to have somebody. We're looking to the future of curriculum adoptions. And so this person would be a vital voice in that work.
Many of these personnel positions are positions that have been staffed in the past, but have been cut as we've been level funded and needed to fund other important positions or initiatives within the schools. And that all of these positions, including the DEI director, relate back to the priorities that are outlined in the strategic plan. Next is curriculum. And this is another very broad ask. And so it's anything from those STEAM carts that I referenced a little bit ago and learning materials to engineering and science supplies across the district buildings. The curriculum ask is very broad and it appropriately addresses needs at every school. We're looking to replace science equipment at the veteran school that has been used since before the middle school moved to its current location. Additionally, textbooks at the high school don't include 9/11 and other current events over the 2+ decades that we just went through. As I mentioned previously, my son is one of the kids who has one of these textbooks, and it was actually published right around the time that I graduated high school. So we need a little bit of a revamp there. Our youngest learners will be able to access increasingly varied library sources, and that at the end of the day, that these on this slide as well as the next slide are needs, not wants.
So if I could just jump in there,
Absolutely.
teachers have been an integral part of these asks. So these are generated from classroom educators working with their building principal or special educators working with the director of special education to say, I have outdated science equipment. I have a textbook or resources that no longer align with the curriculum framework. So teachers have been kind of an integral part of developing these asks. And so these are the teacher voices coming forward asking for these requests.
Next on this list is tuition-free kindergarten. Most districts in Massachusetts offer all-day kindergarten at no additional cost to their residents. Kindergarten is no longer an entry point to elementary school, and students are expected to finish kindergarten knowing how to read, and a full day is necessary to set our youngest learners up for success moving forward. If it's an expectation to success, then it shouldn't cost any extra to parents or require them to ask help from the district. Additionally, this line has been difficult to balance in the past within the budget lines. And so being able to fund it through our operating budget would help to stabilize that line. Next is equipment and maintenance. And this line is really going to the recurring costs that are needed to adjust for yearly increases in the cost of the services that we have contracts for. Finally, on this list is town benefits. Because of the personnel we've added, the town takes care of the benefits cost for most of our personnel, but they were concerned that, should we hire all of these people and then should they all require benefits, full insurance, that would cause a strain on the resources on the town side. So they worked with our business director and came up with that number of almost 500,000 that we have added in to this ask to be able to cover those benefits. And so this is not a cost that's going directly to the school department. If question 2 is successful, that portion of the monies will go directly to the town to be used for benefits.
Through the chair, if I could, on that one point. So historically, and even today, healthcare benefits are all handled in the town budget under one line in the finance department. But we certainly, in our discussions with the interim town administrator, John McGinn, recognized that if we brought staff people on, there could be an increased cost to our benefit program. But the one thing that's unknown is, will every employee who comes to town subscribe to the Marblehead benefit plan? So they looked back historically, and it's somewhere in the range of 75 to 80% of Marblehead employees when they come to town join the plan. The next question was, what number do we use? Do we use an individual? Do we use married? Or do we use a family? All of which have, the family is almost 3 times as much as an individual. So Michelle worked with Steve and John McGinn to look at a blended rate to estimate roughly how many people potentially, if they came to town, could join the plan. So I think what I'm saying here is it's a conservative number. And if people do not subscribe to the healthcare plan and they're on either another family member's plan, that money would historically, as it does, roll back to free cash. I suppose there is an opportunity that we could potentially exceed that dollar amount, but I don't think that's likely given the conservative nature that we used to address that. And so I just wanted to add a little bit of clarity on how we arrived at that finance number.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Finally, within these requests are our capital requests. So some of our capital requests are within question 1 that on the ballot, but others the town was not able to fund, or they did not meet some of the thresholds for debt exclusion overrides. So as the school committee talked about it, we did decide to add those things in. Again, as I mentioned with the groundskeeper position, we often get criticism that we're not maintaining our buildings. It was one of the big promises that we made when the taxpayers entrusted us with the funds in order to build the Brown School. And so being able to have money in our budget, in the operating side of the budget, to be able to take care of the facilities maintenance that we have was really important to this committee and to the administration. So that's what you see within this that will be taken care of. If Sarah Fox was here, and Emily, feel free to jump in because Emily was the other person on the facilities subcommittee, but there is a detailed facilities 10-year maintenance plan, as well as there was an outside audit done last year that identified, and then the plan was built off of that audit that identified basically everything within our buildings and on our buildings that needs to be addressed, and rated them from critical on down. So the things that we're addressing this year are obviously at the highest priority level. As again, the high school roof and part of the veterans roof is within question 1, but then again, there are quite a few that are being addressed. Do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Sure. So these, just to clarify, are what is critical for FY 22 and 23. We mushed them together. So it's just what was the most critical out of that. We didn't even do everything that was on the list for this past year. And it also, so every year there's going to be more and more stuff just to get our buildings to like up to the level where they should be working now anyway. But because we haven't been maintaining them, we're not there. So it's just to get to that threshold. We're not doing anything above basic, I guess you could say. So there'll constantly be items that are going to come up every year off this plan that we created that are going to need to be funded.
And as I referenced at the beginning of the slides, that's one of the reasons that we're asking right now, because there is a list of priorities for next year's budget as well. That again, should we be successful with question 2, there are obviously these one-time costs that would be used to fund the additional subsequent maintenance costs. But should we not be able to fund these costs this year, those additional maintenance costs will be added in or could be added in next year. Did you want to say something?
No, I think that's a great point for pointing that out, that these one-time monies that amount to $1 million, the idea, and we've talked about this at previous forums, would be used to look at future requests based on the plan. But I just wanted to highlight on this slide, I mean, we see 4 items here that are safety items. They amount to almost $300,000. And given where we are today, I think it goes without question that the safety of our students should be a priority. They are a priority in the district. And these items were identified as the top priorities to enhance the safety that we have in all of our facilities. And it would really be a shame to see that, this not go through and we wouldn't have the ability to do some of these safety improvements that are outlined here tonight.
Yeah. As I mentioned, the MHS entry doors are on there. One of the additional pieces that would be beneficial in being able to redo these doors as planned is that it would increase the sight lines for visitors who are coming towards the building. If anybody, obviously those main doors right there have decent sight lines, but that's not actually where our staff sits. They sit off to the side in the front office. So the sight lines and the visibility is very poor there. So being able to move it to the front would be much safer for the building. And final slide is the tax impact, the estimated tax impact for this request. So the median single family home in Marblehead is that $738,000. So if you have a home that is assessed at that value, you would be having an additional $310.53 added to your tax assessment each year. And then, it goes up or down versus how much your house is assessed for. We have been encouraging people that if they have a question directly about their property, that they call the town tax assessor so that they can get that number ironed out before they vote. Did you?
And we did identify, thanks to a question at our forum last week, that this represents a 4% increase. So, but you do need to first look at your assessed value, and Marblehead does do a rolling reassessment. So you would need to look specifically at what your assessment is, but on average, this represents the tax impact as assessed represents a 4% increase.
And then we've been working with Lisa Hooper at the Council on Aging, because one of the things we heard at town meeting was the concern for people for whom this increase in their taxes is troubling. And so we have put forward over a dozen opportunities for seniors to work in the schools or at the district to support incentive to reduce the tax burden for them. We're also looking at other communities that might have other programs to make abatement opportunities available.
Yeah, our goal is, we never want to see our older people in our community pitted against our younger people in our community. And so, we're actively searching for ways in which to not let that happen. All right. I will stop sharing my screen at this point and open it for questions.
If I could, through the chair, one last thing. Going back to town meeting, I just thought it would be worth, since this is our last public forum, I just wanted to thank Dr. Bucky, his administrative staff, and of course, Michelle Cresta for all the work that started back in October. John, it was an earlier schedule than we have ever experienced before, recommended by the Finance Committee. And I think the planning for success, had really set the stage for that and allowed you to get out in front of it, in addition to the work that Michelle had done the previous years in the district. So I wanted to recognize that. I also wanted to thank interim town administrator John McGinn, who came back after having been town administrator and finance director, and worked with us very closely to get these numbers nailed down in such a way that we could present them to town meeting in a timely basis. And as well to, Emily Becker from the Finance Committee, the Cam Staples, who was also a liaison, and Alex Goolsby, who's the chair, that all worked with us to, come up with this budget, throughout many budget subcommittee meetings. Also, Jackie Becker, chairman of the Board of Selectmen, was present. So there was a real iterative opportunity to ask questions, refine the request, or clarify what the request was from the period of, say, October until we went to our public hearing in March. And I just want to thank everybody and the school committee. We had numerous meetings, as you know. Once we'd have the liaison meetings, Michelle would present, here's where we're at this week. And we'd have questions as a school committee to ask where things were going, and an opportunity to either add things or deduct things from the budget. So I think a very cooperative effort. And I just want to thank everybody who was involved to bring this forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a great piece, kind of some clarification within there is that, this budget does have the full support of the school committee, and it did receive unanimous support from FinCom as well. And so that was, those were two very important things for us, obviously. And then additionally, as David mentioned, these asks were refined and they were discussed, and that's why, I've referenced some in question one. Obviously, we're talking in depth about question two, but that we have worked very closely with the town to be able to figure out where the best place is for all the pieces of the budgetary asks for this year. Do you have anything to add? All right. I will call Jonathan Letterman. Please state your full name and address for the record. Jonathan, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sorry about that. Jonathan Letterman, Ida Road, Marblehead. At the last meeting, and I'll keep this short, I asked that you would please post the budget book so that everyone could see the base budget, because this includes a lot of items that are recurring expenses and it creates transparency for your budget. As far as I can tell, looking now, I don't see it posted. So my question for you, yes or no, are you going to post the school budget book online before the election?
We have the budget posted.
Okay. Yep, the budget is posted.
Budget book with the detail line items year over year, the one that all the school committee members get, that's several hundred pages that there was some discussion about. I see Michelle Cresta is in the audience. A lot of us have been asking for this. And I just want to know, it's 300 pages. You have a high-speed scanner right outside of the superintendent's office. Will you scan it and post it online before the election? It's a very simple question.
Budget materials are posted.
Yeah, our budget materials are all posted, and I know that there has been some concern in just kind of posting that out there on the internet.
Posting the budget book that you all have copies of, that's a public document that's available for public inspection. You're saying there's a problem with posting that online? I just don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me that you wouldn't be forthcoming and just post that. It's available to the public. What you're saying is the 300-page budget binder that all 5 members of the school committee have, as well as the superintendent and budget manager, Michelle Cresta, you will not post that before the election. I just want to be clear.
Well, I mean, Michelle wants to jump in. That budget booklet was outdated probably the day after Michelle gave it to us, Jonathan. But that being said, there were many updates that were provided, and I'm happy to make my binder available to you if you want to come by 1 Waldron Street tomorrow and pick it up. I
think that the whole community ought to be able to see those amendments that were made. There's a lot of content that you're asking for. So I'll stop. Look, clearly you're not going to post it. I don't understand why. I know Michelle said maybe next year you would do it at the March 31st school committee meeting. I'll leave it at that, and I won't keep going down that. But I just want the record to be straight that you guys have not posted the year-over-year budget book, and I don't understand why.
Hold on, bear with us just a second. We just lost power to our building.
It's back online.
Can the audience hear me? Can the Zoom audience hear me right now?
I can hear you.
Okay. Were you able to hear me say that we lost power?
Yes.
Okay. So our things are just booting back up. So just sit tight. Sure. We can continue. I apologize if there's feedback as this kind of reconnects, but we can continue using my computer. I apologize that no one is going to be able to see anybody but me for a little bit. But yeah, Jonathan, I think there were some concerns with people's identifying information being out there. And so next year, Michelle will work to be able to have that move forward. It's one thing to have it for anybody to come and see. It's another thing to have it online. So.
Okay. I don't understand why.
Tom Allen.
Yeah, hi. This is Tom Allen, 31 Orange Street. My question is, I understand the.
Tom, I
can you
cannot
hear me?
Oh, hold on, Tom. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Can you repeat?
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Okay, Tom Allen, 31 Orange Street. I understand the override is continuing. It's not just a 1-year increase, but the wording on the town warrant, and actually the ad that we would be voting on, is for a specific amount for a specific fiscal year. It actually says, $3,051,093 will use for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022. So the way that's worded, this is a 1-year override. Am I misunderstanding how that's worded?
So
Are we on? Tom, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Great, thank you. We've got our systems back and running. David, can I defer that question to you?
Yeah, I was trying to find the specimen ballot that's available as well, which I think might
Yeah,
have.
it's on the town website.
Right.
There's a link from the front page. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's two things. I think, Tom, you were talking about what was at town meeting versus now what's on question 2. So,
Yeah, I'm talking about what's on the actual ballot that people will be voting in.
Yeah. So question 2, shall the townspeople be allowed to assess an additional $3,051,093 in real estate and personal property taxes for the purpose of the school department budget, which the monies from this assessment will be used for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2022. The responsibility for the town ballot, warrant articles, and everything related to town meeting falls with Lisa Mead and her legal office that the town has used, I think, for the last 15 years. And they follow all the requirements and guidelines of Massachusetts general law. So this will be a general override, as far as a general budget override that will go on beyond 2022.
Yeah, but you do see the confusion that people may have, right?
Yeah, very good question.
No, it's a good question. And I see the confusion on question 1, looking at question 1, the same thing. Question 1 doesn't even mention the dollar amount. Whereas question 2, I asked a few people about, question 1 is debt exclusion that expires after a limited time, doesn't even have the dollar amount listed that it's asking people to support. Question 2 does have the dollar amount. There were previous years, for instance, Tom, when there was I remember in particular, there was a fire truck one year and it just said to raise the appropriate monies needed to purchase a fire truck. And it didn't even mention, the $900,000 that was agreed upon at town meeting. So, the legalese that goes into these ballots, I'm not too keen on, but I do know that Lisa Mead follows all the guidelines that are required when it comes to having appropriate ballot questions and articles on the town warrant. That's the best answer I can give you on that, Tom.
Okay, I was just concerned about leaving yourself open to someone challenging this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Paige's iPhone. If you could state your full name and address.
Hi, this is Paige Minchell, 3 Bridge Street, Marblehead. I have a question for the board on the tuition-free kindergarten item. I was just wondering if question 2 does not pass, would the board choose to use the savings from the declining enrollment and teacher attrition to pay the $375,000 for all-day kindergarten for the community? And could each committee member give us a yes or no on that?
We don't have all of our committee members here tonight. We're missing 2. But this did come up at our previous, the second forum that we held. And while our budget for this year is set, so if we are not successful with question 2, our budget for FY23 is set. It would be something that we could consider next year. So for FY24.
Okay, thank you.
Sue McGinnis.
Hi, this is Sue McInnes. I'm at 39 Bayview Road. I had a question, actually kind of a two-pronged question, is relating to security and what is allotted for any security. Would any money be designated for trained security professionals, or is it just equipment like cameras and radios?
There is a security person for the front desk at the high school and some security software for visitor identification. So in addition to the cameras and radios that are part of the capital ask.
So there is a monitor, a live monitor at the high school. And then additionally, I do sit on the SAC for the high school. And at our meeting last week, it was discussed that the police station is hopeful that the SRO position will come back as a part for the district, providing us a resource officer to be shared amongst buildings.
Okay, so as far as having somebody at the front desk, that would be like one person at the high school, but not equivalent people at the other schools. It would be like a resource officer that would be shared.
The resource officer would be shared, correct? And and the person at the high school would be like at the door monitor.
Okay, a door monitor. So they're not necessarily, I mean, a door monitor, could it be somebody rotating in that's otherwise an aide in a classroom? It wouldn't be necessarily somebody trained in security?
It would be, I believe that the funds are there to have that person have an identified position, so it would not be a rotating staff. But I, you know, Dr. Bucky, if you correct me, feel free, but to the best of my knowledge, it's not a trained security person, although they are at a security desk kind of providing that service.
Okay. And then relating to like the cameras that are being used, is it, are the cameras mainly just to be looked at after the fact? If there's some kind of person that shouldn't be there and something goes wrong and then we have to look at it afterwards? Or is it, you know, live monitoring of these cameras so that somebody who is at the front desk has to be watching the cameras that are watching any entrances?
I'll defer to you, Dr.
Yep,
Bucky.
I think it's a combination of both. There are certainly things that we don't talk publicly about in terms of school safety, but the cameras and the monitors have people dedicated to both watching them in the moment, and then if there's an event, of using them to look back.
And I know again from the high school SAC meeting from last week, it was discussed that that there are cameras on doors, and so if a door is opened in the middle of the day, an alarm does sound, and the cameras are on it, and the janitors and administrators are alerted so that they can make sure that the building is secure and that anybody who just entered should be there.
Okay, I did have a related question. In the case where you said there was several instances of hate that had happened across the schools, I think you said there were 11 or so. I'm concerned, are these cameras going to be used? I'm not sure if anybody was identified as the person or the child putting up that, if it was graffiti or if it was some other kind of incident, were the culprits identified, and is it something that these cameras can be used to identify people, positively, versus saying in a generic sense, oh, we've had 11 incidences, but we didn't find out who those people were that were doing it. So I'm just wondering if the cameras are kind of tied into this, where we're expecting the cameras to do the job kind of after the fact versus finding out, we need to know who it is who's doing these things we don't want to be happening. It'd be nice to say, okay, yeah, in half the cases we found out who had done it and we did prove, they've got a problem and we're going to reprimand them. Or if it was, hey, this really wasn't a targeted incident as it appears, and it is something like a hoax, which is a similar type of thing, which causes a lot of grief. Just kind of curious how that ties together, the security and the monitoring of incidences of hate.
Yeah, They play a role, certainly in the investigations, and that's something that I can't talk about publicly, investigations or student discipline if somebody was identified as a perpetrator in these instances, but certainly cameras would be a resource in supporting building level administrators in identifying areas of the building where things were happening.
Thank you, Sue. Jen Schaffner?
Sorry about that. I lost power. I think you guys did too. So I'm on my phone. I
Thank you.
apologize. Yeah. And now I don't have internet, so it's all good. So I have, I think, a total of 4 questions. The first is, so I noticed in tonight's presentation, there was a little bit of a shift in terms of the increase in the personnel line item for the question 2 override. And you differentiated between classroom teachers and non-classroom teachers. And I may be misquoting. So Sarah, you said that with declining enrollment, there was no plan to add additional classroom teachers, but there is plan to add non-classroom teachers, which you outlined. So again, I guess I go back to my question from the other night is, where are the savings from all of the declining enrollment going to be used for staffing? So whether they're classroom teachers or non-classroom teachers, if you have savings, those should be applied to all personnel increases. So I guess a clarification on that would be helpful.
So I'll start and then I'll probably turn it over to Dr. Bucky. The numbers should not have changed. The only thing I changed on the presentation tonight was the date on that first slide. I know at the first forum, you had caught that in some of the slides that I had pulled from previous budget presentations that they didn't quite match up. So we made sure before the forum 2 that everything matched up and that it aligned with the current ask. But from forum 2 to forum 3, nothing except for that date has changed. And then Dr. Bucky, I think I'll let you kind of.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the question is.
So again, and my question was about the numbers. In the earlier 2 forums, the focus on the personnel was just with the increase in the personnel that you're asking for over $1 billion, and the listing of the positions that money is going towards. And I had asked in the earlier forum why the increase in the budget to cover personnel when we have a significant decline in enrollment and are in the midst of it now, and would have cost saves that would, as a result of that, would be able to be used to hire the personnel you're looking for. So tonight, I guess I heard at the beginning, the emphasis from Sarah was that none of those personnel are student, or they're not classroom teachers, recognizing that there's declining enrollment. But classroom teachers or non-classroom teachers, you're asking for $1 million for additional personnel. Again, while we're in a period of we're looking at almost a 25% decline in our enrollment over a period of about 11 years or 10 years.
Well, the focus of this budget is the FY23 budget. And when we met with principals, there were virtually no retirements. So they were not anticipating any retirement savings for the building of the FY23 budget. And there was not an anticipated 25% decrease for the FY23 in terms of student enrollment.
Okay, I guess we're going to go around and around on that. I'm not going to get an answer. It's a 10-year decline, it's 25%, and we still have the same number of teachers that we've had with less students, and it doesn't look like we're going to have less teachers. So retirements aside, there are other ways, to take advantage of cost saves. And apparently we're not only not looking to save money or take advantage of that, we're increasing by $1 million. I'll move on to my next question.
No, if I could,
Go ahead, David.
if I could add some clarification. I don't, I could have looked that up, Jen, but I'll take your word that it's 25%. It would be nice to see that. You certainly were a member of the school committee with the prior administration when people were retiring from this district, and how those salaries were used or not used, or that the people continued to be replaced. And, as I brought up at the last meeting, I think this is something that the town of Marblehead needs to be more vocal on. You know, do we want to have class sizes of 24 students, or do we want to have class sizes of 17, 18, or 19? And, you know, that's something that needs to be defined as we go through enrollment. But I don't want to leave the public with an idea that we have a 25% decline in enrollment from last year to this year. And why have we not laid off people? I think the practice, at least up until now, has been not to pink slip people and not to lay off staff. And some of the enrollment changes, I think, you know, flow mainly, they're starting with kindergarten, first and second grade. And so that was the first step at addressing enrollment decline, was building an appropriate sized Brown school. We had 3 schools, Upper Bell, Lower Bell, Coffin, and including the Gary School, where the previous administration was advocating for 6 classrooms per school, a 99,000 square foot school. The evaluation that was very thorough, that was done by the building committee in concert with the school committee and the administration, was that our enrollment was declining and that we should decrease the size of the new school. That was done. We built an 81,000 square foot school for 54 million, $1.5 million under budget. We have the capacity that's needed to handle the students going forward, rather than building a school that has empty classrooms. So I think we have started to address that, Jen, but I think you raise a very valid point as we continue to, as this wave of smaller classes move through the schools, some of the teachers follow, say, the third grade class to fourth grade and the fourth grade to fifth grade, but eventually class sizes will be smaller. And I think that's a very real thing that needs to be addressed. And it does, in fact, present savings opportunities in the budget that could be looked at as funding sources for other needs.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I will leave it at this and I'll move on. In 2017, we had 3,144 students. This year, we have approximately 2,600 students. I tried to pull down the enrollment report from the MSBA for the Coffin Gary project, as it's still called on the website, and all of those links are broken. So I've since requested, done a FOIA request for a copy of the NESDEC enrollment, which I think is probably more up to date. But at the very least, we're down, 500, 600 students since 2017, and there is a projected continued decline. So no, I'm not saying we're down 25% this year. We will be in approximately 4 years, a total of close to 30% since 2017. So that's all I'm saying. And that, yes, there, I would think would be cost saves. It's a very complicated, sophisticated administrative and managerial challenge, without a doubt, to be managing 300 or 400 staff members in a school department in a way that is fair to employees, as well as meeting the needs of the towns and the students. I'm not discounting that, and I just am making that point that it's a very complex challenge.
I would wonder, kind of to, if we've got the student data, then I have no idea where our staffing level for classroom teachers was at within that same time, and how much that's gone down, and when retirees have not been replaced, or when programs have been reduced, and people where classes, particularly at a high school level, classes aren't being taken or anymore. So, I know that there have been shifts across the district, and that, sometimes positions are not replaced because there's no longer a need for it.
Well, I'll push back on that, Sarah, and leave it at this. I would suggest that you or the superintendent and the school committee should know what the staffing has been. So anyway, I'm going to move on. Question 2 is about question 2. If question 2 does not pass, and Sarah, you had mentioned that you do have a budget plan, for FY23 that exists now without question 2. Are the items around the safety and the security, are those items going to be funded? Are those part of it, or are those dependent on the passing of question 2? They
are dependent on the passing of question 2.
Okay, great. Thank you. I did also want to mention, and maybe David, you can speak to this, and it just sort of came to mind because Dr. Bucky, you spoke about abatement and savings programs, which I think are important without a doubt. But I also think it's important to note that while it's probably overall fairly de minimis, for every person who has their taxes abated, that is going to be a levy on the rest of us. So, if you had a measurable amount of people having their taxes abated, your median and average home tax increase would go up. David, I don't know if you have any comment on that.
I don't know historically how many people have subscribed to the abatement program and how that's accounted for in the assessor's office, Jen.
So you don't know that. Have you been on the finance committee? If people have their taxes abated, I would assume that levy goes across everybody else.
I don't have the exact number, but I do know from having been on the finance committee, there was a very low engagement creating opportunities for people to work on those programs. And so what Dr. Bucky has been mentioning is at his previous position, the community created a lot more opportunities. And so now how that would then, as you say, if someone gets an abatement of $189 for a $400,000 home, that $189 would need to be picked up by somebody else. And so I would need to get, not being a professional tax assessor, to understand how that $189 on an abatement would be allocated across the town. But clearly others would end up picking that up, it would seem.
Yeah. Okay. And then just the last question I had briefly is, you mentioned, or not mentioned, in the list of personnel, there is a request for a groundskeeper, which I'm not 100% sure what that means. Is that, whether that's a sort of a custodian or that's an exterior person, I'm not sure. But, the school department does have an MOU, I believe, unless you didn't have it this year, with the Park and Rec department to maintain the grounds of the schools. So I'm trying to understand if, where that fits in versus having a groundskeeper, because I don't know that there's an actual budget item for the Park and Rec department, but that is part of their budget that is allocated to the schools. So maybe you could just talk about how that fits in and why are we continuing with the Park and Rec? Have they not been sufficient? What is the reason for the need for a groundskeeper?
Well, I think you can remember from the times you were on the school committee that, we would get a lot of criticism about our grounds not being adequately maintained, that the grass would be long, that there'd be other issues going on. And with the opening of the Brown School, they made it clear that was going to be a very large ask for them to add to their list of all of the grass in town that they take care of. And so we do have our MOU, but we are additionally, providing for the needs that we have within our district and our buildings. David, do you want to add anything to that?
Right. I think that's true. And I think, I know Park and Rec is very focused and committed to supporting the landscapes, the various landscapes that we have in town, whether it's the public parks or the school. And I think, they're another example. They've done yeoman's work with the amount of money that's been available to them for the last 17 years. And in fact, since you mentioned it, Jen, I used to sit on FinCom meetings when they talk about not having enough money to buy grass seed. So I think the time is probably coming, next year with the town override, they're going to need to look at those kinds of things. What's needed to maintain the new Fort Sewell? Over $1.5 million is being invested in Fort Sewell, Crocker Park, school properties, Brown School. But I think to the point of the groundskeeper too, I know we made a concerted effort within the school project that still came in under budget. We did make investments in some groundskeeping equipment. There's a shed to help maintain that. Todd is stretching the responsibilities of his custodians to the furthest degree he can before they say, well, that's not really custodial duties, but they're doing it. And I know Todd has mentioned in discussions having a landscaper on his staff would help not only at the Brown School, but would be an excellent liaison between Park and Rec to focus on playing fields, recreational fields, and the maintenance of the schools. And it's just, it's a step in the right direction. I don't think it's the answer.
And it was on the budget from last year as well, but got cut in order to sort of make ends meet. Did you have a question in the audience here up front?
Never drill now. So this one, this was interesting. I didn't really understand this. So I'm going to read it and then you guys can clarify. The town of Marblehead has the ability to access $6 million in funds through the ARPA, American Rescue Plan. So according to Moses Gardner of the select board, only 144,000 of those funds would be proposed for the rail trail repair. 76,000 went to COVID supplies. These funds can be used for capital improvements. Why can't this $880,000 be used for the cameras out of this actual ARPA fund?
It's a great question.
I just met with the new town manager this week. There was a really extensive process for ARPA funds that Jason Silva undertook. There was a committee that got together. They put surveys out to the community. They got feedback. We prioritized the list. We did this, and then Jason left. And so the new town manager, or the interim town manager, came in and he was kind of hands off. He said, you know, if I were designating these funds, I might not have done it this way, but let's wait for the new town manager. So I did meet with Thatcher this week and talked about some of the things that the school department had put forward and tried to kind of put those on his radar for how those funds are allocated.
So just as a follow-up, clearly security is a high priority.
Yep.
We're all globally aware of that. If those cameras are great technology and great safety, if this override doesn't pass, will you at least look into accessing those funds through ARP?
Well,
I'm not ARP, you know what I mean?
The ARPA.
Yep.
No, not the retirement accounts, you know, but you know what I mean?
Yes.
And just to make clear, we don't control those. So the schools have their ESSER funds, and that those are, you know, Michelle Cresta and Dr. Bucky work very closely with those, and they bring them to the school committee periodically to update us on how those are being spent. And so the ARPA funds are at the town level.
Yeah. The town level has the ability, these funds can be used for capital improvements. Like.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Martin. Catherine, are you there? All right, I'll move on to Allison Taylor. Oh, hold on, Allison. Catherine,
That's okay. I lost my power and it's taken me a minute to get back online.
No,
Catherine Martin, 29 West Shore Drive. My question tonight is, why would a special education parent, specifically a parent of a child who's in a substantially separate or highly restrictive environment, be compelled to vote for this override? Because at face value and anecdotally, we have been told that many of the things that we've wanted for our children over the last few years are not available because of funding. Whether it's there's not enough teen chairs, we've had to wait longer times for our EP meetings, evidence-based interventions are just not there on the pre-K, the K, or the first grade level. We have a shortage of speech and language pathologists. Tutors are not available at the times when your kids need them. So they actually kind of lack inclusion and lose out on things like EDU, especially at the village school. We only have one assistive technology person for the whole district, and that can be transformative for our special education students. When I read through the Planning for Success documents, they're not mentioned. There really doesn't seem to be anything mentioned for them in the override documents. And then, you know, when I look to just the general budget, do we just assume that these students will receive level funding? So again, what compels me to vote for this override, being a parent who is in that situation?
I'll speak high level briefly, and then Dr. Bucky, I'll probably turn it over to you to speak a little bit more operationally. The DEI director, a lot of times that gets caught up in the diversity aspect, thinking of, the differences that we have. But the equity and inclusion piece to that director is huge, and helping to navigate through special education pieces where, the statement all means all applies to everyone. That position is not only important when we experience, symbols of hate being in bathrooms and various phobic remarks, but it is important in really broadening the way that our special education program rolls out and impacts our students throughout the district.
So I think Dr. Donnelly has fielded.
Actually, I actually just kind of want to go back to, I want to push back on that. So as a special education parent with a child in a substantially separate classroom, I can expect that the DEI coordinator is really going to work heavily to provide inclusion for these students. And they're going to make it so this person is actually going to work to make it so these kids are going to be able to be in the general education classroom. That's part of this job description. I really, I mean, I've been a special education parent for 10 years and I've heard a lot of things, and hearing that a DEI coordinator is going to make special education inclusion a reality in our district is something that I am really looking forward to seeing. And I would like to know what part of this person's job description that they actually bring this skill set to. And if you could speak to that more, Sarah, that would be great.
Well, so I kind of push back against words being put into what I just said. The DEI director, some of their responsibilities is working with special education and making sure that special education students have as inclusive an environment as possible. Again, you have a much broader depth within this than I do, Katie. So, I'm not going to pretend to be able to talk around you. And I don't know exactly, it's not my purview to lay out what this person exactly will do on their day-to-day, but I do know that part of the responsibilities of a DEI director includes working with the special education population. I'm going to let Dr. Bucky speak a little bit more operationally, and maybe he can talk to some of those points.
Yeah, I think Dr. Donnelly has fielded a number of questions about where in this budget are special education students supported, and this budget does support classroom level teachers, provide supplies, materials, equipment, technology that supports all students. And so she's met with CPAC who had questions. And so I feel like we have attended to the student services piece overall. I can't speak to an individual family and their student.
And I think, just to be clear too, because this question
would be inappropriate to do that. Thank you.
So Katie, just to speak to it too, because this question didn't come up, but the funding in this is not in this budget to create a fully inclusive model throughout the district, which is thought of as sort of two classroom teachers, a special education teacher and a regular education teacher, for lack of a better word, where they work together to have all students included in every room. So that is not part of this budget. That is, that absolutely has been discussed within conversations over years within this district. If Megan was here tonight, she could speak much more pointedly to that, because that's been some of her work. But just to be clear, whether you would be pro that or anti that type of a situation for our school district, that is not a part of what our ask is this year.
Additional team chairs, speech and language pathologists, tutors, assistive technology personnel either, correct?
I believe there were some tutors that were on that list.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Allison Taylor, now you're up.
Hi, sorry, we lost power too, and then my internet is still out, so I'm on my phone, so I apologize.
No problem.
I just wanted to ask, thank you, by the way, for having these sessions. I think they really help to provide some transparency to the public and to provide what the public is really looking for, to be able to ask you guys questions and have more of an open forum. So I appreciate that very much, as I know many parents do. My question is really in regards to the strategic plan and the, any benchmarks or any budgeting items done against it. I definitely think that the Planning for Success document is a fantastic start. And I think that it definitely outlines the big ticket items that we want to hit and touch upon. I'm just wondering what the benchmarks for success for each of those items are, or how we as a community can see that, and how we can, perhaps compare it from a timeline perspective. So instead of just, waiting till 2026, see the incremental progress, how we measure that, how we ensure that happens, and maybe budgetary items that are associated with each of those items.
Yep. So one of the pillars of the strategic plan is facilities, and we've talked about the capital plan that goes out 10 years from the facilities audit. There are initiatives for this year that we'll be able to report out on that we were able to achieve then in FY24 during that budget process, looking at additional initiatives, and the monitors of success are, have we achieved what we set out to do? And that's what the planning for success model gives us.
And but there's no link so if I look at the outcomes in our planning for success document, I see June 30th, 2026. For most of the outcomes, I think maybe all of them. There's no link back, to ensure that items are happening along the way in this particular document.
We would be reporting out on those annually. The 2026 is at the end of this 5 years. These are all the things we hope to accomplish. Some of them were accomplished this year in terms of curriculum or technology. Some of them will be accomplished in subsequent years. And as superintendent and people in charge of each of those pillars, regular reporting out to the school committee on them.
Okay, but okay, I mean, I think that answers my question. I don't think there's anywhere for us as a community to be able to go to see that, right now, or until you are able to report out on it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and
David, did you want to add something?
I think the superintendent's summative about self-assessment identified a number of those areas that, while the planning for success was only completed in the summer, and there were no new budgeted items per se, but within the structure of the various plans, there were actually concrete accomplishments that are outlined. And I know that summative assessment will be available to the public as well to see. And we can, maybe make an effort to outline some of those I know the way Desi and the way Dr. Bucky did his self-assessment, he ties it back into what the goals were and what the various areas were related to his performance.
Yeah, that's great. I actually didn't even mean it in regards to his performance. I was, just talking about the strategic plan generally for the district. But thank you so much, David.
Yep.
Thank you. Holly Crosby.
Hi, Holly Crosby, 6 Harborview Lane. I just have a question about the DEI role that we've never had in this town and is clearly the most expensive of the proposed personal expansions. Why are we not considering sharing this with a neighboring district like Swampscott to better use the town's resources?
So we did discuss that at a meeting at one point because we were aware that is being done in some communities, and we came to the decision based on the experiences that were had in the district this year, as well as the various administrators' recommendations, that we would benefit from a DEI director who is fully focused on Marblehead. Emily, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, so the DEI director, it's not just what has happened this year. These types of events have been happening since my son started in kindergarten, which was 7 years ago that I know of. And we're just starting to address them as a school and a community, because before they weren't brought up or talked about. So it's an ongoing issue that we have in our school district, in this town. And as a school district, we are taking the first step in doing something about what's been going on, where our larger community should also look into what we're doing. And it is something that is absolutely necessary that we have a person here full-time to address the issues that are ongoing in this community.
I also failed to make this comment at either of the two previous forums, but it sort of occurred to me as I was thinking over the last forum, that there are a lot of initiatives that are coming down to school districts from the Department of Ed, and a lot of initiatives that are coming down regarding diversity, equity, inclusion. And so those can be thought of as, when you hear us from time to time refer to things as unfunded mandates. So they are going to set things up that we have to set benchmarks that we have to meet, but they're not giving us any additional funds in which to figure out how to meet them. And so again, what happens in those cases is that it falls to people who are already in the district, working in the district. And so we do have DEI teams at all the school buildings at this point. And so they're working within that right now. But again, as we hear, we've heard many times over the past 2 years in particular, but often even outside of COVID, that, we continually ask more and more and more of the staff within schools and our educators. And the days, there's only so many hours in our days. So being able to balance the directives that are coming from the Department of Ed with the realities of the boots on the ground and what we need to roll out for our students and how we need to support our educators for these initiatives that we're being tasked with is an important piece to note, because that is a part of why many districts are turning to putting in a DEI director.
Yeah, and I'll just go off of that. Our DEI committee is, I think there's 8 of us, and they're all teachers and administrators, and they have a full-time job. And then on top of it are creating, they're wonderful and we're so lucky to have them, but they're creating all the professional development that's happened this year for our teachers, but they're doing it outside of their, on their own outside of teaching. And they don't have the bandwidth to continue doing that. They need someone to be doing everything else that we need to have done, because we're extremely lucky to have this group of people, but we can't do it by ourselves. There's too much.
I actually have another question that kind of is related, but this was my initial question. In the wake of all the tragic school shootings, has anyone thought about our security level at our schools? Here we are spending all this money on DEI, and meanwhile, are our children really safe at school? What's to say someone couldn't come into one of our schools and do what they did in Texas? So has that been discussed? Maybe adding more security, spending the money there?
Absolutely. Security is a part of this request. I don't know if you had, I'm not sure when you got onto this meeting, but we've talked about it quite a few times within this forum already, that there are security requests for cameras, for doors, a new set of entry doors, as well as additional security precautions at the high school. There are radio replacements, and those radios have been requested since I've been on the committee. For this, my 4th year, and I think they predate my existence on the committee as well. So there's multiple safety pieces that we are looking to address within this ask.
So, cameras sound great, but does a camera stop someone from going in with a gun and shooting people? I think what we really need is a presence, a person, a security person that is there to protect our students.
So there's no security personnel identified within this request, but I did mention too that the police department believes that they will be able to staff the school resource officer, the SRO position again this coming year, which is oftentimes a valuable kind of touch point between students and law enforcement.
So that position has been empty, or it hasn't been?
Correct.
Is there a reason for that? I'm just curious.
Staffing levels at the police department.
Oh. Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen's iPhone.
Hi, Karen Talmakla, 11 Prager Road. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I had a question about the DEI role. So I understand, many other towns are having this position, but I was just curious, if there were any evidence studies that show that these positions are effective, with, combating racism, bigotry.
Yes, is the short answer to that.
Could you send me the studies that show, because I've been seeing the opposite.
I'd be happy.
I'm just saying that, I've been seeing that studies that hate crimes are at an all-time high, and we have a DEI team in every school. It just seems like we've been talking a lot about DEI, and it's a very important conversation to have. But there's something that's missing, and I'm not sure if it's, this expensive DEI staff position. But I know that there are people in the community who are very willing to volunteer their time to help, especially parents. I know I myself volunteered to be an advocate against, anti-Semitism. And I was welcomed onto this DEI working group. I met with the former Metco director and a few other parents, and we met a few times, and the group just dissolved with no explanation given to me. And it made me feel it was just very frustrating, feeling that I was strung along, like they cared to hear what I had to say, and then it was just gone without any explanation. So I was just wondering, why don't we just share this position first with a neighboring district, see if it's worth, the taxpayer dollars, work with, community members, and then assess how effective it is.
I think Dr. Bucky will send you the various articles. And I think, to your point, we do have quite a few community members who do a lot of this work already. And so, we've got the Marblehead Racial Justice Team, the Anti-Defamation League, there's the Task Force Against Discrimination, that all, are made up of various community members. And yet we still sort of find ourselves, I know in the wake of some of the anti-Semitic incidents, particularly at the Village School, Dr. Bucky did call a meeting with various community leaders and organizers. And we had in a few people from various Jewish organizations around the Boston area, and in order to try to figure out how do we best address this, and what do we do in our schools, as well as what do we do within our larger community in order to really target and try to decrease the amount of times that this is happening. And so, we are taking advantage of all of the resources that we do have available to us, and we still do feel that this is an important position.
Well, I was a resource, but, people stopped responding to my emails after I was supposed to be part of this DEI working group. I met 4 times with our group, and then it just dissolved.
And I'm sorry that happened. I don't have any knowledge to speak to that, so.
Okay, well, I can send you information. But Nan Murphy welcomed me onto the group because I had concerns about how anti-Semitism was not being addressed properly. And, I was just strung along. Thank you.
Erin Noonan.
Hi, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, it's Erin Noonan, parent of 3 students on IEPs in various stages of special education needs. I am voting in favor of this override because these are true needs, and they are real true needs. I think that I would like to see going forward a little bit more of robust prioritization on the student services level. I think that there's no question that the budget asks that that this administration could find and can allocate an additional $3 million without without hesitation and with good reason and for good cause. I think that I appreciate your honest answer, Sarah, around the fact that, there isn't in this budget the true ability to effectuate a co-taught model and the direction that we ultimately want to find ourselves in. I guess, I just want to continue to encourage and advocate for the needs of our most vulnerable population within the student services rubric, and those who have also suffered the greatest learning loss and regression, whether or not they be on students with disabilities. And we continue to focus on revenue sources for that population. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. And I think, to speak to that for a moment, that absolutely is a priority going forward. I think it was identified by FinCom this year, as well as we work together with them to really stabilize the approved budget from that. If question 2 is not successful, what our budget will be in that case. And so there's always work to be done there. Does anybody in the live audience have a question? Okay. I'll move on to Charles' iPad. If you could state your full name, please, and your address.
Charles Gester, 20 Gregory Street. Good evening. Been interesting. I'm curious what the credentials of a DEI person would be. If you could tell us briefly, how will you recruit for that position? Thank you.
Yep. It would be a licensed director or supervisor under a DESE license. It's interesting, the commissioner sends out a weekly update on Mondays, and he had 11 items in the update today. 5 of them had to do with DEI initiatives across the state and what districts are doing, or the expectations for districts. And so this person would be observed and evaluated, supervised as any of our tech director, our director of student services, our facilities director, same licensing requirements.
And that position would report directly to you?
To me.
As well, Dr. Bucky?
Yeah.
And I know one of the questions at a previous forum was about goals, and that person would work to set goals with Dr. Bucky that are based on the realities within our district, as well as the expectations from the Department of Ed, just like every other one of our administrators does.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Amy Waldman.
Hi, Amy Waldman, 6 Drumlin Road. I have a question related to the student services budget request summary. It's from the master budget. And I'm having a hard time understanding how you arrived at some of your numbers. The total amounts for spending in 21 were 1.7. And then in 22, they were 2.1. But then in 23, they jumped 265% to 7.7 million. Can anyone explain this? I guess I have several questions related to this, but can anyone explain that jump?
I would need to have the budget documents that she's referring to and to sit down and go over them. I'm not sure in a public forum I'm going to be able to speak to the numbers.
Yeah, kind of that depth.
Did any of you notice a 265% increase?
In what line?
It's the total on page 4. So it's the total budget summary. So it's the total of all the budget, all the items.
I would also need it in front of me. I'm sorry, because I'm not sure whether, there are a lot of documents that have been out there. And so
I am happy to sit down with Michelle Presta and Amy and to go over this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you guys audit the budget? I mean, did you look at it?
Oh, absolutely.
I just don't know. I mean, if I saw a 265% percentage increase on one of my budgets at home, I wouldn't have to refer back to it. I'd know about it. That's why I'm confused that
I'm wondering if there's if if a big part of that is I believe it's about like $846,000 that is an additional need this year to cover out of district, or for FY23 to cover out of district placements as well as the transportation for those out of districts. So my guess is that some of the requests tonight are built into that, but that I think it's $846,000 is a big chunk of that.
But this went from 2 million to almost 8 million.
Yeah, Amy, I think you'd have to clarify. I think Dr. Bucky would be happy to respond to that without just throwing numbers out there and not even giving us a page and a reference to refer.
But I'm giving you the page. It's page 4 of the budget.
We do probably, Michelle Cresta goes without saying, the work that she's been doing to realign dollars within our budget. We've had no 245% increase. I mean, we're looking for a budget increase that's been outlined in a $3 million override above and beyond the 2.5%. So it's certainly not 245% across the board. But when you look at other numbers and move them into the proper buckets that they need to be in, because in previous years, I think what happened a lot of, Amy, was some of these costs were in individual schools, or they were not carried in the appropriate lines that they needed to be. So a lot of it, the work that Michelle has been doing is to realign the existing expenses we have and make sure that they're properly accounted for. So where you'd see that increase, there'd be other subsequent decreases.
Okay, that kind of leads to the second part of my question, which was that when I looked to the line items, they didn't tally. But I could almost tie it out within 500, but it looks like maybe what she might have done is moved some of the 22 budget into the 23 budget. Does that sound like something you were just trying to explain that she might have done?
Sure.
This is Michelle here. Sorry, my video is not working. I would have to see the documents you are referring to. Certainly, we did not have a 265% increase anywhere in the budget. And I'm not sure specifically what you're looking at. If you're looking at the original documents from the budget request, there was a typo in there. But certainly our out-of-district tuitions did not go up more than that 840 some odd thousand that we were speaking of earlier.
So you're aware of a typo in the budget?
In the original budget book, if you're looking at a copy of a budget page that was in the budget book, there was a typo, and that was from the original November request that is not posted on the website. So I'm not sure if you're referring to a document on the website.
I didn't get this from the website.
You did or you did not?
I did not. This is the one that you gave out. A friend shared it with me. It was photocopied it was scanned from the binder, Sarah Gould's binder.
There was an error in the initial pages in the budget binder, and that's actually part of the reason it is not posted here, because that was the initial ask back in November, and there's been a lot of reiterations of that budget binder book.
Okay, can you clarify what the revised numbers are then?
They're on the website in the line item budget.
There's a line item budget on the website?
There has been all along. And I will gladly meet with you to go over the individual lines if you'd like.
Catherine Martin.
I'm on 29 West Shore Drive. This question may be a little out of the scope of the override, but I am curious in terms of tracking learning loss and allocations for that next year. Are we going to publicly release any of our student assessments? My guess, and I'm not a teacher, so I don't actually understand. I know they're doing a ton of assessments all the time, but I believe iReady is the one that most of at least the K-8 students are using most of the time. And I'm just curious, is there going to be a release of kind of where our students are benchmarking on those assessments, one, and then two, potentially make minor changes going into next year based on those assessments? And I don't even know if they'll trigger budget allocation changes, but considering that this is kind of the first year of school after, the interruption of COVID, and even this year wasn't, as perfect as we'd all like it to be, with a lot of sickness and absences. Is that something that we as parents can expect? And, if those assessments do show that, we're falling below our benchmarks, or that we're not sustaining kind of that exemplary baseline that we like in Marblehead, that there could potentially be a Control-Alt-Delete on how we approach next year in terms of allocating resources or funding? Thank you.
So I can speak to that. We have not had a history of using data to inform our decision-making in the district. And so bringing iReady this year has really been an exciting development. And as I've done evaluations on our building leaders and directors, I have asked that they include data to support their achievement and goals. So I would encourage Katie to get in touch with Nan Murphy to talk about iReady and how that data will be used to inform instruction and services moving forward.
Debbie's iPhone, if you could state your full name, please, Debbie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Debbie Nicholas, 6 Park Lane. I have a more general comment, and it's a little more in the emotional realm. Everything's been very tactical and very detailed tonight, but my general comment is that over the past 2 years, parents have been begging on school committee meetings for their kids to be educated properly, to be able to go to school full time. And here we are in a situation where a lot of us feel like our needs were not answered, and now you're asking us for $3 million additional. And I would like to just have someone reconcile that for me.
So, obviously the pandemic threw a lot for a loop. And I think if you look at Marblehead as we put out a plan and what we did for our students last year when we were not in person full time, that we were ahead of the curve.
Here, I have to push back there. Tower next door was in school 5 days a week. Okay, full time, 5 days a week. So here we are asking the town, asking many people in very difficult times for a lot of money. And personally, I can't think of a better cause to donate money to or to pay for than education. But I have an issue with how things are lining up here. I feel like our needs were not met over the past 2 years, despite feedback upon feedback upon feedback. So I'd just like you to kind of say something in general, and maybe Dr. Bucky too, for those of us who are like, wait a minute, our kids didn't get the basics and now you want $3 million more a year.
So Tower is a private school, not a public school. So it charges money for you to be able to go there. And so oftentimes at public or private schools, they do, to David's point earlier, they have a lower student-teacher ratio. And so when trying to fit kids into the specifications of DESE, many private schools, I would probably say most private schools, were able to pull that off better than public schools were. It's a pretty rare public school that has 13 kids in a classroom. So, again, we were ahead of the curve on when DESE would roll back stipulations. We had already rolled them back, or were already in the works of rolling them back publicly. So, there was no winning with COVID. We were upsetting people left and right. And so if we had done things differently, we would have upset a different group of people. So it was and is the difficulty of what we have all just come through. And, I doubt that I can actually say anything to make that feel better.
Fair enough. I just want the comment out there because I think there are many people who feel the same way as I, and especially since, for making the distinction between public and private, there were many other places in the United States that were in school full time.
Yep. But we did, I'll dish to you in a second. We did have stipulations from the Department of Ed where our funding is tied to in kind of how we could reopen. And so we cannot be held accountable to other states who had different stipulations or no stipulations on how they allowed their public schools to operate. Amelia?
Oh, no, I was just going to say the same thing. We didn't have, just like Sarah said, we had pretty strict rules of what we could and could not do the past 2 years. So I think saying that it was on us as a school committee that made those rules is not fair to us. We were just following mandates and guidelines. So, and I don't quite understand how that relates to the override, which we're lucky that we have this new administration who came and found all our holes over the last 2 years, even during COVID and a pandemic, and are saying, well, we would like to fix all these gaps in the education of your districts that were here before COVID. So I just don't see how they connect. And I am sorry you feel that way about it.
And I think a really great example is our technology requests that some of which have been met over the past 2 years using grant funds and ESSER and budgetary allotments, and others of which are being asked for currently, is that, when we hit COVID, we did not have the background infrastructure within our district in order to be able to pull off some of the things that other better appointed districts like Lexington were able to pull off. And, and right around our corner, again, a private school at St. John's Prep was able to pull off. And so we really found ourselves between a rock and a hard place. And not all of that, because again, there were a lot of factors and there were a lot of rules and regulations that we had to live within when we were putting together our back to school plans. But our lack of technology infrastructure from years of level funded budgets did not help us. It hurt us here.
But we hired a new director of technology who is sitting right here, who has upped our technology to we're almost where it should be, or we are where we should be, or above. I mean, we've done so much in this time, which I think needs to be commended as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that as a committee member, and I know Megan's not here, we were very strong advocates to challenge Dr. Bucky and his staff. But once again, out of respect for the administrative staff, the teachers, the teachers union, trying to work through what started out as a lot of unknowns, in that first 6 months of the pandemic. If we all think back to what was going on through November of 20, at my full-time place of work, you were out of work for 14 days and out of work for this amount of days. And now here we are where it's down to 5 days. We have vaccines and people can be boosted and children can get shots. So we've gone through an extreme progression of understanding about the pandemic and learning about it. But I think even during all of those unknowns, the nursing staff that we had in Marblehead, what an amazing job that they did to go through all of the requirements that were changing almost monthly on how often people needed to be tested or when to quarantine or when to isolate and how to identify that. And then we did, the voluntary testing and all those things that added to allow us to try and go back to school as normal as possible, remote learning, hybrid learning. And dare I say, I think we were one of the first 15 districts to go back to school full time. And then also, without masks and try and advance learning. But the whole mask issue also was a very regional thing. Look at Boston. They just went back to school today for the first time without masks. And I had actually even lost track of that, to think that there was actually a school district in Massachusetts that was still wearing masks. But apparently, there were some requirements or mandates or something else that was going on in Boston where they weren't able to drop the masks until today. So it is difficult to reconcile, Deb, and I think it is a period of time that we all really want to look forward and not look back on. But I think there will be a lot of lessons learned and some things that we can do, like technology, other areas that we can prepare us to make sure that we have, the appropriate tools that our students need, as well as this ask that looks to a normal education as much as normal can be, where we're in school all the time, and what are those needs that we have for an exemplary education. I think that's what we've been trying to identify.
Okay, you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Erin, you have your hand up?
Yeah, real quick. First of all, thanks again for this is, I think, the third and final of these forum opportunities. I can imagine that's a lot, very time consuming, and I appreciate the efforts. I think I just had a thought regarding our plan. Is part of our strategic plan going forward. I know it's not necessarily in this budget ask, but what is the plan for our lengthening our time on learning and school school hours, which I believe are is considered very short and like one of the shortest. I don't know if that's relative to the rest of the country, but or just even like peer communities. I know that it has been a problem in terms of delivery of special education student services, that the restrictions within the school, the length of the school day, which obviously implicates funding sources. I guess I just wanted to know, how is that being addressed in the strategic plan, and when do you see us kind of, maybe is it the next collective bargaining cycle? When is the time that we will kind of cross that bridge and have that conversation about lengthening our school days? Thank you.
Absolutely, Erin. Great question. That will be part of the next contract negotiations with the MEA. I think that there are a lot of opportunities. Our contract, we haven't looked at language in the contract to the point where there's still language in our collective bargaining agreement that says teachers will not be required to open milk cartons. And so I think we have some tremendous opportunities at looking to address some language issues, some compensation issues, and the length of the school day will certainly be part of those conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I don't have any other hands raised on Zoom. I don't have any hands raised in my live audience. So I will thank everybody for joining us this evening, and thank you for all of the questions. Megan and myself will be at the farmers market on Saturday answering any additional questions that anyone might have, or if they just want to stop by and say hello, we would welcome company. And additionally, we're still trying to figure out a few other ways, that we might be able to be out in the community and answering questions, and sort of, for people to just kind of stop on by before June 21st. So we thank everybody for joining us.
I'd like to thank everybody that's joined for the 2 public sessions that I was at, and I know there was one in the morning at the previous session. So thank you for everyone's participation.
This is a very busy time of the year. Yeah. All right, I will adjourn us at 8:43. Thank you, everyone.